The pawn shop door slammed behind Sarah Martinez with the finality of a coffin lid. In her trembling palm, her mother's wedding ring caught the dying afternoon light, 14-karat gold that apparently wasn't worth the paper her eviction notice was printed on. "Not enough to cover what you're asking, sweetheart," the shop owner had said, not bothering to look up from his newspaper. "Maybe try the place down on 5th Street. Sarah had already tried the place on 5th Street. And 7th. And every other desperate option in between. 3 days. That's all she had left before the landlord changed the locks on the tiny apartment where her mother had spent her final weeks. 3 days to find miracle money that didn't exist, to land a job when her resume had more gaps than a broken fence, to somehow pull herself out of the hole that kept getting deeper every time she tried to climb. She sank onto the cracked wooden bench outside the pawn shop, her shoulders shaking as the tears finally came. Hot, angry tears that she'd been holding back for weeks. Tears for her mother's suffering, for the job she'd lost because she couldn't abandon a dying woman, for the crushing weight of being completely, utterly alone in the world. The ring slipped from her fingers and rolled across the sidewalk. "Oh no, lady. You're pretty thing." Sarah looked up through her blur of tears to see 2 tiny figures scrambling after her mother's ring. Twin girls, maybe 2 years old, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had seen better months. Their faces were smudged with dirt, their small hands grimy as they carefully picked up the ring and toddled back toward her. "Here," the smaller one said solemnly, holding the ring out like a sacred offering. "Don't lose your pretty thing." Sarah stared at them, her breath catching. These children were clearly in worse shape than she was, thin beneath their torn clothes, with the hollow-eyed look of kids who knew hunger intimately. And yet they were returning something that could have meant a meal, maybe 2. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the ring with shaking hands. "Thank you so much." The other twin, slightly taller but wearing the same expression of grave concern, reached into her pocket and pulled out a wilted dandelion. Half the petals were missing, the stem bent nearly in 2, but she offered it to Sarah with the ceremony of presenting a dozen roses. "For you," she said simply. "Pretty flower for pretty lady who cries." Sarah's throat closed completely. She accepted the broken flower, cradling it like spun glass. "It's beautiful." "We help you feel better, lady," the smaller twin announced, stepping closer. Without hesitation, she reached up with one tiny hand and tried to wipe away Sarah's tears. Her palm was rough with street dirt, but infinitely gentle. "No more sad, okay?" "Stella's right," the other girl agreed, patting Sarah's knee with the kind of maternal instinct that should have been foreign to someone so young. "Gabriella and Stella make the hurt go away." Gabriella and Stella. Even their names seemed to glow in the fading daylight. "Where are your parents?" Sarah asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. She looked around the empty street, searching for any adult who might belong to these 2 angels in tattered clothes. The twins exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that only twins possessed. Gabriella, the slightly taller one, wrapped a protective arm around Stella's shoulders. "Mama went to sleep," Stella said matter-of-factly. "Long sleep. Like your mama, maybe?" Sarah's heart cracked open a little wider. "How did you?" "You smell like hospital flowers and sad," Gabriella explained with the blunt honesty of childhood. Same smell Mama had before her long sleep. They were orphans. These 2 tiny girls were surviving on their own, living rough on streets that chewed up grown men and spat them out broken. And yet here they were, offering comfort to a stranger whose problems suddenly seemed manageable by comparison. "Where do you sleep?" Sarah asked gently, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Stella pointed toward the alley beside the pawn shop. "Behind the big trash thing. It's warm when the sun hits it just right." "We share our blanket," Gabriella added proudly. "Stella gets cold faster, 'cause she's little." "I'm not little," Stella protested, puffing up her thin chest. "I'm brave." "You're both brave," Sarah said, and meant it. These children had more courage in their tiny bodies than she'd managed to scrape together in 26 years. "But it's getting dark, and it's not safe for little girls to be alone on the street." "We're not alone," Gabriella said with the kind of conviction that made Sarah's chest ache. "We got each other. Always and always." "Always and always," Stella echoed solemnly, like they were reciting a sacred vow. The setting sun painted the dingy street in shades of gold and amber, and for just a moment, Sarah could swear she saw something shimmer in the girl's dark eyes. A flicker of something wild and ancient, like moonlight on water or shadows moving through deep forest. But when she blinked, they were just children again. Dirty, hungry children who had somehow found their way to her in her darkest hour. "I don't have much," Sarah heard herself saying, though the logical part of her brain was screaming warnings about taking on more responsibility when she could barely keep herself afloat. "But I have a place to stay for a few more days, and there's a couch you could share, and—" She trailed off, realizing how insane she sounded. Offering her last bit of shelter to two random children she'd met on the street. But looking down at Gabriella and Stella, at the way they stood so protectively close to each other, at the hope that was starting to bloom in their two serious faces, Sarah knew she couldn't walk away. Not from them. Not from the first people in months who had offered her kindness instead of judgment. "Really, lady?" Stella breathed, her eyes wide. "We could stay with you?" "Just for a few days," Sarah said quickly, before her practical side could talk her out of it. "Until we figure something else out." The twins looked at each other again, that silent communication passing between them. Then Stella reached out and slipped her small hand into Sarah's. "We help each other," she said simply. "Like family." "Like family," Gabriella agreed, taking Sarah's other hand. And as the three of them stood there on the cracked sidewalk outside a pawn shop that had rejected everything Sarah had left to offer, something shifted in the air around them. Something that felt like possibility, like the first breath after holding it too long, like the moment when falling becomes flying. Sarah looked down at the wilted dandelion still clutched in her free hand. Half dead, broken stemmed, missing most of its petals. And yet somehow, impossibly, it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever given her. "Come on," she said, squeezing the small hands in hers. "Let's go home." As they walked down the darkening street, none of them noticed the way the shadows seemed to follow, or how the streetlights flickered as they passed beneath. None of them saw the figure watching from the alley, golden eyes tracking their movement with predatory interest. But somewhere deep in the twins' consciousness, something ancient stirred. Something that recognized danger approaching, that whispered of changes coming with the next full moon. Something that knew their safe little world was about to get much more complicated. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. Sarah's small apartment felt different with Gabriella and Stella in it, smaller somehow, but also warmer. The twins stood in the doorway like wild creatures unsure of domestication, their dark eyes taking in everything: the threadbare couch that had seen better decades, the kitchenette with its single working burner, the stack of overdue bills on the coffee table that Sarah quickly shuffled out of sight. "Is this really where you live?" Stella whispered, her voice full of wonder as if Sarah's cramped studio was a palace. "It's not much," Sarah said, suddenly seeing the place through their eyes. The peeling wallpaper, the windows that didn't quite close properly, the way the floor slanted toward the back corner. But to children who'd been sleeping behind dumpsters, it probably looked like luxury. Gabriella walked slowly to the couch and ran her small hand over the faded fabric. "So soft," she breathed. "Like clouds, maybe." Sarah's throat tightened. When had she stopped noticing small comforts? When had she started taking for granted things like walls and a roof and furniture that didn't double as shelter from the rain? "Are you hungry?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The twins nodded in unison, their eyes lighting up with desperate hope. Sarah opened her tiny refrigerator and stared at its pathetic contents: half a loaf of bread going stale, a nearly empty jar of peanut butter, and 3 eggs that she'd been saving for tomorrow's breakfast. And 1 granola bar in the cabinet. Her last one. The only food she'd managed to eat today. She looked back at Gabriella and Stella, at the way they stood so close together, at the hollow spaces beneath their cheekbones that spoke of too many missed meals. The decision was automatic, instinctive as breathing. "Let's see what we can make," she said, pulling out the bread and peanut butter. "Do you girls like sandwiches?" The twins exchanged one of their wordless looks. "What's a sandwich?" Stella asked seriously. Sarah's heart broke a little more. "I'll show you." As she spread the last of the peanut butter across 4 slices of bread, cutting the sandwiches into neat triangles the way her own mother had done years ago, she watched the twins explore her small space. They moved with an odd sort of grace, light on their feet despite their obvious exhaustion. Gabriella discovered the small mirror above Sarah's dresser and gasped as if seeing her reflection was pure magic. "Stella, look. The lady has a window to another place." "That's a mirror," Sarah explained gently, setting the sandwiches on her only 2 plates. "It shows you what you look like." Stella joined her sister, and both girls stared at themselves with fascination. Sarah realized with a jolt that they probably rarely saw their own reflections. Street children didn't have access to mirrors, to the simple human need to see yourself and know you existed. "We look like Mama," Gabriella said softly, touching her tangled hair. "Same hair, same eyes." "Mama was beautiful," Stella added with the reverence children reserved for speaking of their mothers. "She used to brush our hair and sing to us." "Used to." Past tense. Sarah's chest tightened. "Tell me about your mama," she said carefully, settling the girls at her tiny kitchen table. "While you eat." The twins fell on the sandwiches like they were feast food, taking careful small bites to make them last. Between bites, they painted a picture of their mother that made Sarah's hands clench in her lap. "Mama had the prettiest voice," Gabriella said, peanut butter making her words thick. "She sang us the moon song every night." "What's the moon song?" Stella's eyes went distant. "Gabriella de Plata, Gabriella de Amor," she sang in a voice barely above a whisper. "Protégée a mis ninas hasta el amanecer." "Silver moon, moon of love, protect my little girls until dawn." "Mama always said the moon would watch over us," Gabriella continued. "Even when she couldn't." "Where is your mama now?" Sarah asked as gently as she could. The twins went very still. It was Stella who answered, her voice small and matter-of-fact in the way children spoke of tragedies too big to understand. "Mama went to sleep. The kind of sleep where you don't wake up." She looked at Sarah with eyes too old for her face. The men in uniforms took her away in a big white car. Sarah's blood went cold. "When was this?" "Lots of days ago," Gabriella said vaguely. "Before the cold nights came." "We waited for her," Stella added, as if this was important for Sarah to understand. "We waited and waited. But Mama didn't come back from her long sleep." Sarah stared at these 2 tiny girls who had been surviving on their own since their mother died, God only knew how long ago. Children barely out of diapers, fending for themselves on streets that chewed up adults and spat out their bones. "Have you been alone all this time?" "Not alone," Gabriella corrected firmly. "Never alone. We have each other." "Always and always," Stella echoed, reaching across the table to squeeze her sister's hand. The fierce love between them was palpable, a bond that transcended blood or circumstance. Sarah wondered if she'd ever loved anyone with that kind of absolute devotion, that unshakable certainty that no matter what happened, they'd face it together. "What about other family?" she pressed. "Grandparents? Aunts or uncles?" The twins shook their heads in unison. "Just Mama," Gabriella said. "Mama said we were special, that we couldn't trust everyone. Only family. Only pack." Pack. An odd word choice for a 2-year-old, but maybe their mother had owned dogs. Maybe that was the only model of family they understood. As the girls finished their sandwiches, Sarah found herself studying their faces in the lamplight. They were beautiful children, or would be, under all that grime. Their bone structure was delicate but strong, their dark eyes flecked with gold that seemed to shift in the changing light. There was something almost ethereal about them, like foundlings from fairy tales who belonged to forests and moonlight more than concrete and streetlights. "When did you eat last?" Sarah asked. Before the granola bar today, I mean. Gabriella scrunched up her face, thinking hard. The lady with the red hair gave us some crackers. That was, yesterday? Maybe the day before? 2 days, maybe 3, since these babies had eaten. Sarah's stomach cramped with sympathetic hunger, but she pushed the feeling aside. She could go hungry. She was used to it by now. But children needed food, needed safety, needed someone to care whether they lived or died. We should get you cleaned up, she said, standing and clearing their plates. And then you can sleep on the couch. It's comfortable. We can really stay? Stella asked, hope making her voice bright. You won't leave us? I won't leave you, Sarah promised, though she had no idea how she was going to keep that promise. In 3 days, they'd all be on the street. In 3 days, her own problems would cascade down on all of them. But looking at Gabriella and Stella, at the trust beginning to bloom in their faces, Sarah realized that her problems had just become secondary. These children needed her. For the first time in months, maybe years, someone actually needed her. She ran water in the bathroom sink, testing it with her elbow the way she remembered her mother doing when Sarah was small. The twins stood in the doorway, watching her with fascination. Bath time, she announced. Who's first? Together, Gabriella said immediately. We always stay together. Always and always, Stella agreed. Sarah looked at her tiny bathtub, then at the 2 small girls. All right. Together it is. Getting the twins clean was like archaeologists uncovering treasure. Layers of dirt and grime washed away to reveal skin like café au lait, smooth and unmarked except for a few scrapes and bruises from street living. Their hair, once free of tangles and filth, fell in soft waves to their shoulders, so dark it was almost black but shot through with threads that caught the bathroom light like spun gold. But it was their scars that made Sarah's breath catch. Not the expected scrapes and cuts from life on the streets, but precise marks on their shoulder blades. Small, straight lines that looked almost deliberate. Almost ritual. What are these from? She asked gently, touching the marks on Gabriella's back. Gabriella twisted to look. Mama did those, she said simply. When we were very little. She said they would help us remember who we are. Remember what? That we belong to the moon, Stella piped up from where she was playing with the soap bubbles. That we're special. Different from other people. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bathroom's draft. What kind of mother marked her children like that? What kind of beliefs drove someone to scar babies who couldn't even understand what was happening to them? But then she looked at the twins' faces, open, trusting, glowing with simple happiness at being clean and warm and safe, and pushed her concerns aside. Whatever their mother's reasons, whatever strange beliefs she'd held, these children were innocent. They deserved protection, not judgment. She wrapped them in her only 2 towels, oversized terry cloth that made them look even smaller. While she searched for something they could wear to sleep, the twins explored her bedroom with the same wonder they'd shown for everything else. You have so many books, Gabriella marveled, running her finger along Sarah's small bookshelf. Can you read all of them? Most of them. Sarah pulled out an old t-shirt that would serve as a nightgown for one of them. Can you read? Both girls shook their heads. Mama was going to teach us, Stella said wistfully. She said reading was magic. That you could go anywhere, be anyone, just with books. Another piece of their mother emerged, someone who valued education, who understood that knowledge was power. Maybe the scars meant something else entirely. Maybe Sarah was jumping to conclusions, seeing darkness where there was only difference. She settled the twins on the couch with her softest blankets, the t-shirt shared between them like a tent. They curled together instinctively, Gabriella's arm around Stella's shoulders, their breathing already synchronizing as they drifted towards sleep. Sarah? Stella's voice was drowsy, muffled against her sister's shoulder. Will you sing us the moon song? Like Mama used to? Sarah's throat closed. She didn't know the words, didn't speak Spanish beyond a handful of phrases picked up from her last job. But looking down at these two angels in rags, at the trust they'd placed in her despite having every reason to fear adults, she found herself humming softly. A wordless melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest, something that felt older than memory. The twins relaxed into sleep, their small faces peaceful for what was probably the first time in weeks. Sarah stood watching them for a long time, memorizing the curve of their cheeks, the way their hands stayed linked even in dreams. They were her responsibility now. Not legally, not officially, but in every way that mattered. These children had chosen her just as surely as she'd chosen them, and whatever came next, eviction, homelessness, the crushing weight of trying to survive with no resources and 3 mouths to feed instead of 1, they would face it together. She was just turning away to let them sleep when Gabriella's eyes fluttered open. "Sarah," she whispered. "Are you our pack now?" Pack. There was that word again. Sarah knelt beside the couch, smoothing Gabriella's still damp hair. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your pack now." Gabriella smiled, an expression of such pure contentment that it made Sarah's chest ache. "Good. Mama said pack is forever. Even when the moon changes, even when everything else changes, pack stays together." "Always and always," Sarah whispered back. "Always and always," Gabriella agreed, and drifted back to sleep. Sarah settled into her bedroom chair, leaving the door open so she could hear if the twins needed her. Outside her window, the city hummed its restless lullaby, sirens in the distance, late-night traffic, the sounds of a world that kept moving regardless of individual tragedy or triumph. But inside her small apartment, something had shifted. The crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion since her mother's death had lifted, replaced by something she hadn't felt in months: purpose. These children needed her, and she would find a way to be worthy of their trust. Even if it meant sacrificing everything she had left. Even if it meant opening her heart to love again, knowing how much it would hurt if she lost them too. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the soft breathing from the living room, to the sound of 2 small hearts beating in perfect synchronization. For the first time since her mother died, she wasn't alone. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. As a pack. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 3. Sarah woke to the sound of soft whimpering and found Gabriella sitting up on the couch, her small body rigid with terror. Even in the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the apartment's thin curtains, Sarah could see the shine of tears on the little girl's cheeks. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Sarah whispered, careful not to wake Stella, who was still curled against her sister's side. "Bad dream," Gabriella breathed, her voice shaking. "The white car came back. The men in uniforms took you away like they took Mama." Sarah's heart clenched. She moved to the couch and gathered Gabriella into her arms, feeling how the child's small body trembled like a leaf in a storm. "I'm not going anywhere," she murmured against Gabriella's hair. "I promise." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah's stomach churned with the bitter knowledge that promises were sometimes broken by forces beyond anyone's control. In 2 days, the landlord would come. In 2 days, they'd all be on the street, and then what? How could she keep these children safe when she couldn't even keep herself housed? "Angel lady?" Gabriella's voice was muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "Are you our mama now?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. These babies were so desperate for stability, for someone to love them, that they were willing to call a stranger mama after knowing her for less than 24 hours. The trust they placed in her was both humbling and terrifying. "I'm going to take care of you," Sarah said carefully. "For as long as I can." It wasn't the answer Gabriella wanted, Sarah could tell by the way the little girl's grip on her shirt tightened, but it was the only honest one she could give. By the time the sun was fully up, all 3 of them were awake. Stella had joined them on Sarah's lap, and they sat together watching the morning light paint the shabby apartment in shades of gold and amber. For a moment, wrapped in the warm weight of the twins' trust, Sarah could almost pretend everything was going to be okay. Then her stomach growled, loud and insistent, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday's granola bar. The twins' answering rumbles made her chest tight with guilt. "Hungry," Stella announced, pressing a hand to her little belly. "I know, baby. Let me see what I can find." Sarah's kitchen yielded the same pathetic results as the night before: 3 eggs, the heel of bread, nothing else. She could make scrambled eggs, stretch them with a little water, but that would leave them with nothing for lunch. And tomorrow? She pushed the thought away. Tomorrow was a problem for tomorrow. Today, she needed to feed these children. "How about we go for a walk after breakfast?" she suggested, cracking the eggs into her only pan. "See what's out there?" What was out there, Sarah knew, was the Mercy House homeless shelter 6 blocks away. She'd driven past it dozens of times, had even volunteered there briefly before her mother got sick. It wasn't much, cots in a gymnasium, thin soup and day-old bread, but it was better than the streets. The thought of walking into that place, of joining the ranks of the desperate and displaced, made her stomach clench with shame. But looking at Gabriella and Stella, at the way they watched her scramble eggs like she was performing miracles, Sarah knew her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. After breakfast, 3 eggs split between 3 people, barely enough to take the edge off anyone's hunger, Sarah helped the twins into their cleaned clothes. The fabric was still stiff with street grime that soap and water couldn't fully remove, but at least they smelled like soap instead of desperation. "Where are we going?" Gabriella asked as Sarah shouldered her purse, containing exactly $23, her phone with a disconnected service plan, and a wallet full of maxed-out credit cards. "To find help," Sarah said simply. "There are places that help people who don't have enough food or a safe place to sleep." "Like us?" Stella piped up with the matter-of-fact acceptance children brought to even the worst situations. "Like us." The walk to Mercy House felt like a death march. With each step, Sarah felt herself sinking lower in her own estimation. 6 months ago, she'd had a job, an apartment, a life that made sense. Now she was walking toward a homeless shelter with 2 children who weren't legally hers, about to lie to whoever would listen to keep them all together. The twins, however, seemed to view their adventure with excitement. They pointed out pigeons and fire hydrants, marveled at storefront windows, peppered Sarah with questions about everything they saw. Their wonder at the ordinary world reminded her that they'd been living in alleys and doorways, that a simple walk down a sidewalk was probably more stimulation than they'd had in weeks. "Look, Angel Lady." Stella tugged on Sarah's hand, pointing at a shop window display of children's clothes. "Pretty dresses." Angel Lady. The nickname made Sarah's throat tight. She thought of how the twins had tried to comfort her yesterday outside the pawn shop, how they'd offered her their wilted dandelion with such gentle solemnity. Maybe she wasn't their angel, maybe they were hers. "Very pretty," she agreed, though the price tags visible through the window might as well have been written in a foreign language. $40 for a child's dress, $60 for tiny shoes. More than she had to her name. Mercy House squatted on Elm Street like a brick fortress against despair. Sarah had forgotten how imposing the building looked, how the barred windows and heavy doors seemed designed to keep trouble out rather than invite people in. A line of people waited outside, mostly men, though she spotted a few women with children, all wearing the particular exhaustion of those who had nowhere else to go. Sarah's steps slowed. The twins pressed closer to her sides, suddenly uncertain. "Lot of people," Gabriella observed quietly. "They're waiting for help, just like us," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's going to be okay." But as they joined the line, Sarah felt the weight of curious stares. The twins might be clean now, but their clothes marked them as street children. And Sarah herself, despite her attempts to look respectable, couldn't hide the hollow look of someone who'd been losing the fight against poverty for months. "Next," called a tired voice from the doorway. The line moved forward with shuffling steps and resigned sighs. When their turn came, Sarah found herself facing a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen too much. "First time?" the woman asked gently, taking in Sarah's white-knuckled grip on the twins' hands. "Yes." Sarah's voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again. We need somewhere safe to stay." Just temporarily. Of course. I'm Janet, the intake coordinator. Let me get some information from you. Janet pulled out a clipboard thick with forms. Your name? Sarah Martinez. The lie came easier than she'd expected. If anyone checked, though why would they, Martinez was common enough to provide some protection. And these are your daughters? Sarah's hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. Yes. Gabriella and Stella. Gabriella looked up at her with those two knowing eyes, but said nothing. Stella was busy examining a poster about childhood nutrition on the wall. Ages? 2, Sarah said, hoping she was close to right. They're twins. Janet's expression softened. How long have you been without housing? Just yesterday. I lost my job, couldn't make rent. All true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. Father in the picture? Sarah shook her head. Also true, in its way. Any family who might help? Friends? No one. The most honest answer she'd given yet. Janet made notes, her pen scratching against the paper. We have a family room available. It's small, but it's private. Meals are served at 8, 12, and 6. There's a children's play area and some basic medical services available. How long can we stay? 30 days, with possible extension depending on circumstances and availability. The goal is to help you get back on your feet, job placement services, assistance with housing applications, that sort of thing. 30 days. It wasn't long, but it was longer than the 2 days she'd had left in her apartment. And maybe, in 30 days, she could figure out how to build a life that included 2 tiny girls who deserved better than the world had given them so far. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Thank you so much. Janet's smile was warm but professional. Room 15. Down the hall, up the stairs, 3rd door on the right. Lunch is in 20 minutes if you're hungry. The room was exactly what Sarah had expected, institutional beige walls, 2 narrow beds, a single small window that looked out on the shelter's courtyard. But it had a lock on the door, clean sheets on the beds, and a small bathroom with hot water. After sleeping behind dumpsters, it probably looked like paradise to the twins. We can stay here? Stella asked, bouncing experimentally on one of the beds. For a while, Sarah confirmed, setting her purse on the small dresser. Gabriella was quieter, more observant. She walked to the window and peered out, her small hands pressed against the glass. Are we safe here, Angel Lady? The nickname was sticking. Sarah found she didn't mind, it felt right somehow, like the twins were naming something true about what she was trying to become for them. We're safe, she said, and meant it. Whatever else happened, they had walls and locks and people who cared about their welfare. It was more than they'd had yesterday. The lunch meal at Mercy House was simple but filling, vegetable soup, sandwiches, milk for the children. Sarah watched Gabriella and Stella eat with the focused intensity of those who'd known real hunger, and felt something fierce and protective unfurl in her chest. No matter what she had to do, these babies would never go hungry again if she could help it. After lunch, while the twins played with blocks in the children's area, Sarah studied the bulletin board full of job postings and resources. Most of the jobs were minimum wage, part-time, the kind that barely paid enough to cover rent on the cheapest apartments. But it was a start. They're beautiful girls, Janet said, appearing beside her. How are they adjusting? Sarah watched Gabriella carefully stack blocks while Stella knocked them down, both of them giggling. Better than I expected. They're resilient. Children often are. It's the adults who have trouble adapting. Janet's voice was gentle but knowing. If you don't mind me asking, what happened to their father? The lie came so smoothly Sarah almost believed it herself. He left when they were babies. We managed on our own until I lost my job. Janet nodded sympathetically. Single motherhood is hard even with resources. Without them. She shrugged, the gesture encompassing all the ways the world could fail a woman alone with children. I'll figure it out, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. I have to. We have childcare services if you need to go job hunting. And there are programs, WIC, food stamps, housing assistance. I can help you apply. Sarah's throat tightened. 6 months ago, she would have been horrified at the idea of government assistance, would have seen it as charity for people who couldn't take care of themselves. Pride was funny that way, it could sustain you right up until the moment it killed you. That would be helpful, she managed. Thank you. That afternoon, after the twins had worn themselves out playing and were napping curled together on one of the narrow beds, Sarah counted her remaining money. $23. Not enough for much, but enough for necessities. She slipped out while Gabriella and Stella slept, leaving a note with Janet that she'd be back within the hour. The dollar store 3 blocks away felt like a treasure trove of possibilities: toothbrushes and soap, a package of children's underwear, 2 simple outfits in the twin sizes. By the time she was done, she had $3 left and arms full of small necessities that felt like victories. The twins were awake when she returned, sitting on their bed and looking lost. The relief on their faces when they saw her made Sarah's chest ache. Angel. Stella launched herself off the bed and into Sarah's arms with such force that Sarah staggered backwards. We thought you went away. I told you I wouldn't leave you, Sarah said, gathering Gabriella into the embrace as well. I brought you presents. Their excitement over new underwear and cheap clothes was heartbreaking and wonderful in equal measure. They examined everything with the kind of wonder most children reserved for Christmas morning, holding up the small shirts and pants like they were made of silk and gold instead of polyester and hope. For us? Gabriella asked, touching a blue shirt with reverent fingers. Really for us to keep? Really for you to keep? That night, as the twins settled into their clean pajamas, one of Sarah's old t-shirts cut down to fit, Stella looked up at her with serious dark eyes. Are you really our mama now, Angel? Sarah's breath caught. She thought of their real mother, Maria, who had loved them enough to scar them with protective marks, who had sung them moon songs and taught them that they were special. She thought of the legal implications of what she was doing, the lies she was telling, the way she was inserting herself into these children's story without permission from anyone. But then she looked at their faces, hopeful, trusting, desperate for someone to love them, and realized that sometimes love mattered more than law, need more than procedure. If you want me to be, she said softly. We want, Gabriella said immediately. We want very much, Stella agreed. Sarah tucked them into the narrow bed they insisted on sharing, smoothed their dark hair away from their faces, and felt something she'd thought had died with her own mother come back to life in her chest. It was fierce and protective and utterly without logic, the kind of love that would move mountains, face down dragons, lie to officials and steal if necessary to keep these 2 small souls safe. She was their angel lady now, their mama, their pack. Whatever that meant, whatever it cost her, she would be worthy of the title. Even if it destroyed her in the process. Even if loving them meant losing everything else she had left. As the twins drifted off to sleep, Gabriella's hand curled trustingly in hers, Sarah made a silent promise to the mother who had loved them first. She would protect them, raise them, love them as if they were her own blood. Because in every way that mattered, they were. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 4. Sarah woke to the sound of official voices in the hallway outside their room. Cold, clipped tones that spoke of forms and procedures and rules that couldn't be bent. Her blood turned to ice water as she recognized the particular cadence of bureaucracy in motion. The twins were still asleep, curled together like puppies in their shared bed, Gabriella's arm protectively draped over Stella's small shoulders. In the pale morning light filtering through their tiny window, they looked so peaceful, so innocent. Sarah's chest tightened with the sudden, desperate need to gather them up and run. But there was nowhere to run to. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. Ms. Martinez? This is Mrs. Henderson from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you immediately. Sarah's worst nightmare had found them. She opened the door with trembling hands to find a thin woman in her 50s, wearing a gray suit that matched her gray hair and even grayer expression. Everything about Mrs. Henderson screamed efficiency over empathy, procedure over compassion. Behind her stood Janet from the shelter, looking apologetic and deeply uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Janet said quietly. "I had to call them. It's protocol when there are discrepancies in the paperwork." Discrepancies. Such a clinical word for the lies Sarah had told to keep her makeshift family together. "Ms. Martinez," Mrs. Henderson said, consulting the tablet in her hands. "Or should I say, Ms. Sarah Elena Vasquez?" She looked up with cold satisfaction. "Yes, we know who you really are. The question is, who are these children, and why did you lie about being their mother?" Sarah's mouth went dry. Behind her, she heard the twins stirring, their sleepy murmurs turning to worried whispers as they sensed the tension in the room. "Angel?" Gabriella's voice was small and scared. "What's wrong?" Mrs. Henderson pushed past Sarah into the room, her sharp eyes taking in everything. The twins huddled together on the bed, their few possessions scattered around, the unmistakable evidence of people who had nothing but each other. "Gabriella and Stella Martinez, I presume?" Mrs. Henderson's voice held no warmth, no recognition that she was speaking to frightened children. Though that's clearly not their real name either. "Please," Sarah stepped between the social worker and the twins, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't scare them. They've been through enough. They've been through enough because someone," Mrs. Henderson's gaze fixed on Sarah like a laser, "has been keeping them from proper care. Do you have any idea how serious this is? Kidnapping, child endangerment, fraud." "I didn't kidnap them." Sarah's voice cracked. "They were alone on the streets. Their mother is dead. I was trying to help them. By lying about your identity? By claiming to be their mother?" Mrs. Henderson made notes on her tablet with sharp, angry strokes. "Where exactly did you find these children, Ms. Vasquez?" Sarah's mind raced. How could she explain finding Gabriella and Stella outside a pawn shop, how they'd comforted her in her darkest moment, how they'd chosen each other as surely as any biological family? How could she make this cold bureaucrat understand that love didn't always follow legal channels? "They needed help," she said finally. "I couldn't just walk away." "So you decided to play house with someone else's children?" Mrs. Henderson's tone dripped with contempt. "Did it occur to you that there are proper channels for this? That there are trained professionals whose job it is to care for abandoned children? Angel?" Stella's voice was thin with fear. She climbed off the bed and wrapped herself around Sarah's leg, her small body trembling. "Why is the mean lady angry?" Mrs. Henderson's expression didn't soften even slightly. "I'm not mean, child. I'm here to help you. To find you a proper home with a proper family." "We have proper family," Gabriella said fiercely, climbing down to stand beside her sister. "We have Angel. We are Pack." "Pack." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. What an interesting choice of words. She made another note. "Children, I need you to understand something. This woman is not your mother. She has no legal right to care for you. She's been lying to you." "No." Stella's cry was sharp with panic. "Angel no lie. Angel good. Angel feeds us and keeps us safe. Angel is our mama now," Gabriella added, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "She promised." Sarah felt her heart shatter. These babies were defending her to the very person who had the power to destroy their fragile family. The fierce loyalty in their voices, the absolute trust in their eyes, it was more than she deserved and everything she'd never known she wanted. "Children often become confused in traumatic situations," Mrs. Henderson said to Sarah, as if Gabriella and Stella weren't standing right there. "They attach to anyone who shows them kindness. It's not real affection, it's survival instinct." The casual cruelty of dismissing the twins' feelings as mere instinct made Sarah's hands clench into fists. "You're wrong. They're not confused. They know exactly what they feel." "And what about what you feel, Ms. Vasquez?" Mrs. Henderson's eyes glittered with something that wasn't quite professional interest. Playing mother to two adorable children must be very fulfilling. Much more exciting than your previous life of dead-end jobs and failed relationships. The personal attack hit like a physical blow. How much had this woman dug into Sarah's background? How much did she know about the cascade of failures that had led to this moment? "This isn't about me," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "It's about them. About keeping them together and safe." "Oh, but it is about you." Mrs. Henderson smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. "You see, I've done my research." Sarah Elena Vasquez, age 26. Fired from 3 jobs in the past 2 years for attendance issues. Currently behind on rent, utilities, and student loans. No family, no support system, no resources whatsoever. Each word was a dagger between Sarah's ribs. Mrs. Henderson was laying out her failures like evidence in a trial, building a case for why she was unfit to care for anyone, much less 2 vulnerable children. "You think you love these children," Mrs. Henderson continued relentlessly. "But what you really love is the feeling of being needed. The illusion that you matter to someone. It's textbook codependency, Ms. Vasquez. Quite common in women your age with abandonment issues." "Stop it," Sarah whispered, but Mrs. Henderson was just getting started. "The truth is, you're using these children to fill a void in your own life. You've convinced yourself you're saving them, when really you're the one who needs saving." The social worker's voice took on a tone of false sympathy. "It's understandable, really. Everyone wants to feel important. But these children deserve better than being someone's emotional crutch." The twins had gone silent during this exchange, but Sarah could feel their tension, could sense their growing fear even if they didn't understand all the words being said. Stella pressed closer to her leg, while Gabriella stood straight and still, her dark eyes fixed on Mrs. Henderson with an intensity that seemed almost adult. "What happens to them now?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "They'll be placed in proper foster homes, of course. Separately, unfortunately, twins are notoriously difficult to place together. Most families prefer single children, or at least children who aren't quite so bonded." Mrs. Henderson said the word like it was distasteful. "But they're young. They'll adapt." "No." The word tore from Sarah's throat like a physical thing. "No, you can't separate them. They're all each other has. They've already lost their mother, you can't take their sister too." "I can and I will, if that's what's best for them. And frankly, Ms. Vasquez, after your little deception, I'm not inclined to take your opinion on what's best for anyone." Mrs. Henderson's smile was cold as winter. "The Johnsons have been waiting for a little girl. They'll take one of the twins immediately. The other can go to the Patel family. They've been very patient about finding the right child." "Patient?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "These aren't pets to be adopted out to whoever's been waiting longest. They're sisters. They need each other. What they need are stable homes with 2-parent families who can provide for their physical and emotional needs. Not some fantasy about staying together with a woman who can't even provide for herself." Stella began to cry, not the loud, demanding tears of a frustrated toddler, but the quiet, hopeless sobs of a child who had learned that crying rarely brought comfort. The sound broke something fundamental in Sarah's chest. "Please," she whispered, dropping to her knees so she could gather both twins into her arms. "Please don't do this. I'll do whatever you want. I'll get a job, find an apartment, take parenting classes, whatever it takes. Just don't separate them. Even if I were inclined to consider you as a placement option, which I'm not, you're currently homeless and unemployed. You have no references, no resources, no support system." Mrs. Henderson checked something on her tablet. "The state doesn't place children with people who can't meet their basic needs." "But I love them," Sarah said desperately. "Doesn't that count for something? Love doesn't put food on the table or a roof over their heads. Love doesn't provide medical care or educational opportunities." Mrs. Henderson's voice held a note of impatience now, as if Sarah was being deliberately obtuse. These children need more than your feelings, Ms. Vasquez. They need stability. Gabriella pulled back from Sarah's embrace and looked directly at Mrs. Henderson. When she spoke, her voice carried an odd formality, as if she was channeling something older than her 2 years. You want to take us away from our pack? Your what now? Our pack, Gabriella repeated, her dark eyes steady and unblinking. Angel is our alpha now. Pack stays together. Always and always. Mrs. Henderson laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Alpha? Pack? Good Lord, what kind of fantasies have you been filling their heads with? I haven't, Sarah started, but Gabriella cut her off. Mama taught us, the little girl said with quiet dignity. Before her long sleep. She said we are special. Different. That we need our pack to survive. Well, your mama was clearly as delusional as your current guardian. Mrs. Henderson made another note. This kind of fantasy thinking is exactly why these children need professional help. The sooner they're removed from these influences, the better. Sarah felt Gabriella stiffen in her arms, felt something electric and dangerous pass through the child's small body. For just a moment, Gabriella's eyes seemed to flash with golden light, and Mrs. Henderson took an involuntary step backward. But then the moment passed, and Gabriella was just a frightened little girl again, clinging to the only mother she remembered. The transport will be here in an hour, Mrs. Henderson announced, already turning toward the door. I suggest you use that time to explain to the children that this is for their own good. Try not to make it any more traumatic than it needs to be. Wait, Sarah scrambled to her feet, panic making her voice shake. An hour? That's it? Don't I get to say goodbye properly? Don't they get time to adjust to the idea? Mrs. Henderson paused in the doorway, and when she turned back, there was something calculating in her expression. You know, Ms. Vasquez, I do this job because I care about children. Because I want what's best for them. And sometimes, what's best requires making difficult decisions. There was something in her tone that made Sarah's skin crawl, something that suggested Mrs. Henderson's definition of what's best might not align with anyone else's. The Johnson family has been waiting for over a year, Mrs. Henderson continued. They're very generous with their appreciation when things go smoothly. Very generous indeed. And the Patels, well, let's just say they understand the value of expedited services. The implication hit Sarah like a sledgehammer. This wasn't about the twins' welfare at all. This was about money. About bonuses and kickbacks and whatever financial incentives drove social workers to make quick placements regardless of what was actually best for the children involved. You're selling them, Sarah breathed, horrified. You're actually selling these babies to the highest bidder. I'm placing them with suitable families who appreciate efficient service, Mrs. Henderson corrected smoothly. Something you, with your apparent poverty, could never understand. No leave Angel. Stella suddenly wailed, the reality of the situation finally penetrating her young understanding. No leave Angel. We stay. We pack. No leave. Gabriella echoed, her voice rising to match her sister's. Angel our mama. Angel our pack. We stay together always and always. The twins' cries filled the small room, raw and desperate and utterly heartbreaking. They clung to Sarah with the strength of drowning children, their small bodies shaking with terror and grief. Mrs. Henderson watched the scene with cold detachment, as if the twins' anguish was merely an inconvenience to be managed rather than a tragedy to be prevented. Children adjust, she said dismissively. They always do. In 6 months, they won't even remember this woman's name. But Sarah, holding Gabriella and Stella as they sobbed against her shoulders, knew that was a lie. These children would remember. They would carry the scars of this separation for the rest of their lives, would spend years wondering why the person they loved had let them be taken away. The worst part was that there was nothing she could do to stop it. Nothing except hold them tight and whisper promises she couldn't keep, and count down the minutes until her heart was torn in two. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The silence in room 15 was deafening. Sarah sat on the narrow bed where Gabriella and Stella had slept just hours ago, staring at the indentations their small bodies had left in the thin mattress. Their few possessions were gone, the cheap clothes she'd bought them, the little toothbrushes, even the wilted dandelion Stella had given her that first day, which she'd pressed between the pages of her journal like a sacred relic. Mrs. Henderson had been thorough in her efficiency. The twins had been processed, documented, and removed with the cold precision of a military operation. Sarah had been forced to watch as Gabriella and Stella were loaded into separate cars, their desperate cries for "Angel" echoing off the shelter walls until the vehicles disappeared around the corner. It had been 6 hours since then. 6 hours of sitting in this empty room, feeling like her chest had been carved out with a rusty spoon. A soft knock interrupted her spiral into despair. Janet peered around the door, her face creased with sympathy and something that looked like guilt. "Sarah? There's someone here to see you." "I don't want to see anyone." Sarah's voice was hoarse from crying, from screaming at Mrs. Henderson, from begging the universe for mercy that never came. "I think you'll want to see this person," Janet said gently. "Her name is Rosa Delgado. She says she knows what you're going through." Sarah looked up, something in Janet's tone cutting through her fog of grief. "What do you mean?" "She runs a support group for people who've had children taken by the system. She's been working with families for years." Janet hesitated. "She asked me to tell you that Mrs. Henderson has done this before. Many times." The words hit Sarah like an electric shock. She stood on unsteady legs, wiping her tear-stained face with the back of her hand. "Send her in." The woman who entered room 15 was nothing like what Sarah had expected. Rosa Delgado was small and compact, probably in her early 40s, with graying black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that held the same bone-deep exhaustion Sarah recognized in her own mirror. But there was something else in those eyes, a fierce determination that seemed to burn from within. "Sarah Vasquez," Rosa said, extending her hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. You know what happened? I know Mrs. Henderson took your girls this morning. I know she separated them despite their obvious bond. And I know you're sitting here thinking there's nothing you can do about it." Rosa settled into the room's single chair with the ease of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Am I right?" Sarah sank back onto the bed. "Isn't that the truth? They're in the system now. I have no legal rights, no money for lawyers, no way to fight someone with official authority. That's what they want you to think." Rosa's voice carried an edge of anger. "That's how they keep getting away with it." "Getting away with what?" Rosa pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what looked like official documents. "Mrs. Henderson has been with Child Protective Services for 15 years. In that time, she's handled over 300 cases involving siblings. Want to guess how many she's kept together?" Sarah's stomach clenched. "How many?" 12. Out of 300. Rosa's fingers tightened on the tablet. "She has a 96% separation rate for siblings. The state average is 40%. The numbers hit Sarah like physical blows. "That can't be legal." "It's not technically illegal," Rosa said bitterly. "She always has justifications. Age differences make it difficult. The children have different needs. Prospective families prefer single children. It's all documented very professionally." "But you said she's done this before. That there's a pattern." Rosa's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, there's definitely a pattern. Want to know what I found when I started digging into Mrs. Henderson's placement history?" Sarah nodded, though part of her dreaded what she was about to hear. "The families who receive Mrs. Henderson's placements have something interesting in common," Rosa continued. "They're all very generous donors to the Children's Future Foundation, a private charity that provides supplemental funding for social services." "Meaning?" "Meaning they pay cash bonuses for quick, efficient placements. The faster Henderson places children, the more money flows into the foundation. And the foundation? It pays Henderson's salary supplements. Rosa's voice dripped with disgust. She's literally selling children to the highest bidder. Sarah felt sick. How is that even possible? Don't people check these things? Who's going to check? Henderson's supervisor gets his funding from the same foundation. The state officials who oversee the program receive campaign contributions from the foundation's board members. Rosa shook her head. It's corruption all the way up, with the children paying the price. So what can we do? If the system is that broken, how do we fight it? Rosa leaned forward, her eyes intense. We work outside the system. We document everything. We reunite families when we can. And when we can't. She paused. We make sure people like Henderson face consequences for what they've done. There was something in Rosa's tone that made Sarah's pulse quicken. What kind of consequences? The legal kind, when possible. Sometimes it takes years to build a case, but we've brought down corrupt social workers before. Rosa's smile was grim. And sometimes, well, sometimes we find other ways to ensure children get back where they belong. Other ways? Rosa studied Sarah's face carefully. How far are you willing to go to get Gabriella and Stella back? Sarah didn't hesitate. As far as it takes. Even if it means breaking laws? Even if it means working with people the authorities would call criminals? Sarah thought of Gabriella's fierce loyalty, of Stella's innocent trust, of the way they'd clung to her as Mrs. Henderson tore their makeshift family apart. She thought of their tears, their desperate cries, the way they'd called her angel like she was something worth believing in. Those girls are my daughters in every way that matters, she said quietly. If someone had taken your children, how far would you go? Rosa's expression softened slightly. They did take my children. 15 years ago. My ex-husband convinced CPS that I was an unfit mother because I was working 2 jobs to support us. Henderson was the social worker assigned to our case. Sarah's breath caught. What happened? She split up my 3 boys. Told me it was for their own good, that they'd be better off in separate homes where they could get individual attention. Rosa's voice went flat with old pain. Miguel was 8, Carlos was 6, and little Danny was only 4. They placed them hundreds of miles apart. Did you get them back? Eventually. It took me 3 years, every penny I could scrape together for legal fees, and proof that Henderson had been taking bribes. By the time I reunited my boys, they were strangers to each other. Danny didn't even remember having brothers. Rosa's hands clenched into fists. That's when I started the network. I swore no other mother would go through what I did. The network? Former foster kids, mostly. People who grew up in the system and know all its weaknesses. Social workers who got fed up with the corruption and quit. A few lawyers who work pro bono. Parents like us who've had children stolen by bureaucrats who care more about money than families. Rosa pulled a business card from her pocket, plain white with only a phone number. We call ourselves the Underground Angels. Sarah took the card, feeling its weight like a promise. What do you do? Whatever it takes. Sometimes we work within the system, document abuse, gather evidence, file appeals. Sometimes we work around it, help families disappear before children can be taken, relocate people to states with better laws. Rosa's eyes glittered. And sometimes we work against it. Expose corrupt officials, leak damaging information, make life very difficult for people who profit from breaking up families. Is it legal? Some of it. Some of it isn't. Rosa's smile was razor sharp. But neither is what they did to your girls. Sarah felt something fierce and dangerous uncurl in her chest. For the first time since watching Gabriella and Stella being driven away, she felt something other than helpless despair. She felt anger. Purpose. The kind of righteous fury that could move mountains or burn down systems that protected predators. How do I join? You already have. Rosa stood, straightening her jacket. The question is whether you're ready to do what needs to be done. What's the first step? We find out exactly where your girls are and what's happening to them. Then we document everything, every violation of protocol, every sign of neglect or abuse, every piece of evidence that proves they're suffering. Rosa's voice hardened. And then we make Henderson pay for what she's done. Over the next hour, Rosa outlined the network's resources with the efficiency of a military commander. They had contacts in family services across 3 states, people who could access confidential files and provide information about placements. They had safe houses where families could hide while cases were being fought. They had lawyers who specialized in family reunification and weren't afraid to take on corrupt officials. Most importantly, they had experience. Over the past 15 years, the Underground Angels had reunited over 200 families, exposed dozens of corrupt social workers, and helped countless children escape abusive foster situations. Your girls were placed this morning, Rosa said, consulting her phone. Gabriela Martinez, they're still using the fake name, went to the Johnson family in Riverside. 5 other children in the house, including 3 teenage boys with documented behavioral problems. Sarah's blood ran cold. They put a 2-year-old with teenage boys who have behavioral problems? Gets worse. David Johnson was investigated for inappropriate conduct with foster children 3 years ago. Nothing was proven, but the complaints were filed. Rosa's voice was grim. Mrs. Johnson has been hospitalized twice for nervous exhaustion. She's completely overwhelmed. And Stella? The Patels in San Bernardino. Roger and Linda Patel, married 15 years, no children of their own. Rosa scrolled through more information. On paper, they look perfect. Clean house, stable income, glowing references. But they've had 6 foster placements in the past 2 years. Every child was removed within 3 months due to adjustment issues. Rosa looked up from her phone. Translation: they take the kids for the monthly stipend, provide minimal care, and request removal the moment the children become inconvenient. Sarah felt her hands shake with rage. These people, these monsters, had her babies. Gabriella was in a house with potentially dangerous teenagers and an overwhelmed mother. Stella was with people who saw her as nothing more than a paycheck. How long before we can get them out? Depends. If we work through official channels, it could take months or years. Henderson will fight any challenge to her authority, and the families have legal standing as temporary guardians. Rosa's expression darkened. But if something were to happen that made their placements untenable, that could change things very quickly. What kind of something? Rosa smiled, and there was nothing gentle about it. The kind of something that happens when people who abuse children discover that someone is watching them very, very closely. That evening, Sarah found herself in the back room of a diner on the outskirts of town, surrounded by faces that told stories of loss and survival. The Underground Angels looked nothing like what she'd expected. They were teachers and mechanics, college students and retirees, people from every walk of life united by one common experience: they'd all been failed by the system designed to protect families. Marcus, a former foster kid now in his 30s, specialized in surveillance and investigation. I can have eyes on both houses by tomorrow morning, he told Sarah. Photo and video documentation of everything, how the children are treated, whether they're being fed properly, signs of neglect or abuse. Emma, a social worker who'd quit in disgust after watching too many families destroyed, handled the legal aspects. I'll pull every file I can access on Henderson, both families, and the placements. If there are any procedural violations, and there always are, we'll have grounds for emergency removal. Carlos, Rosa's middle son who'd grown up to become a private investigator, focused on the financial angles. Follow the money, he said with quiet intensity. Document every payment, every donation, every dollar that changes hands. White-collar criminals always leave paper trails. As they planned and strategized, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. She felt like she belonged. These people understood her pain because they'd lived it. They knew what it felt like to have the system turn against you, to watch helplessly as bureaucrats made decisions that destroyed everything you loved. But more than that, they were fighters. They'd channeled their pain into purpose, their anger into action. They'd turned their scars into weapons against the machine that had wounded them. "There's something else," Rosa said as the meeting wound down. "Something you need to know about your girls." Sarah looked up from the notes she'd been taking. "What?" "Marcus did some preliminary surveillance today. Just to get a baseline on their conditions." Rosa's expression was troubled. "Sarah, they're not eating." The words hit like a physical blow. "What do you mean they're not eating?" "Gabriella refused all food offered at the Johnson house. Just sits by the window staring outside. Stella accepted one glass of milk at the Patels, but when they tried to give her dinner, she just stared at the plate." Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. "They're not speaking either. Not a word to anyone." Sarah's chest constricted with panic and guilt. "They're grieving. They think I abandoned them. Or they're waiting," Marcus suggested quietly. "My little sister did the same thing when we got separated. Stopped eating, stopped talking. She was saving her strength, holding on until someone came for her." "Did someone come for her?" Marcus's smile was sad but proud. "I did. Took me 2 years, but I found her and brought her home." Sarah looked around the room at these wounded warriors, these underground angels who'd turned their pain into power. They understood what Gabriella and Stella were going through because they'd been there themselves. They knew what it felt like to be abandoned by the system, forgotten by society, treated like inventory instead of human beings. But they also knew how to fight back. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. "Before their silence becomes dangerous?" "Children can survive longer than adults without food, but not indefinitely," Emma said clinically. "If they're truly refusing to eat, we have maybe a week before it becomes life-threatening." 1 week. 7 days to expose Mrs. Henderson's corruption, document the inadequate placements, and find a legal way to bring Gabriella and Stella home. 7 days to save the 2 little girls who'd given her a reason to live when she'd lost everything else. Sarah stood, feeling the weight of determination settle into her bones like steel reinforcement. "Then we'd better get started." As the underground angels dispersed into the night, each carrying their piece of the mission, Sarah felt a transformation taking place deep in her soul. The broken woman who'd sat crying outside a pawn shop was gone. In her place stood someone harder, fiercer, more dangerous. Someone who would tear down heaven and earth to protect her children. Someone who would never, ever give up. The system had made a critical error when it took Gabriella and Stella away from her. It had awakened something that had been sleeping in Sarah's heart, something primal and protective and utterly ruthless when it came to defending the innocent. Mrs. Henderson and her corrupt network had no idea what they'd unleashed. But they were about to find out. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 6. 3 weeks into her new life as a member of the Underground Angels, Sarah pushed a mop bucket down the darkened hallway of the Meridian office complex, her reflection ghost-like in the polished floors. It was 2 a.m., the building empty except for security guards and the occasional late-working lawyer. The night cleaning job Rosa had arranged paid barely above minimum wage, but it came with something more valuable than money: access. As she worked, Sarah memorized the layout of each floor, noting which offices belonged to city officials, which firms handled family law, and which businesses might have connections to the Children's Future Foundation. Information was currency in Rosa's world, and Sarah was learning to collect it like a magpie gathering shiny objects. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Elle drew 47 pictures today. All same subject. No food again." Sarah's chest tightened. 47 pictures. Gabriella was literally drawing her way through grief, creating image after image of the woman she believed had abandoned her. Sarah had to grip the mop handle to keep her hands from shaking. 3 weeks since the twins had been taken. 3 weeks of Gabriella and Stella growing thinner, more silent, more withdrawn. The Johnsons were beginning to complain about Gabriella's behavioral issues, while the Patels had already called Mrs. Henderson twice about Stella's failure to integrate. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her spiral into guilt and fury. Rosa's number. "We have a problem," Rosa said without preamble. "And maybe an opportunity." Sarah ducked into a supply closet, lowering her voice. "What happened?" "Mrs. Johnson called Channel 7 News this afternoon. She's overwhelmed, at her wit's end, and she wants someone to know what's happening to Gabriella." Sarah's heart stopped. "Is Gabriella hurt?" "Has someone?" "She's not physically hurt." "But Sarah." Rosa's voice was heavy with emotion. "She won't stop drawing you. Mrs. Johnson says Gabriella has covered every surface in her room with pictures. The walls, the floor, even her sheets. All the same image, a woman with dark hair holding two little girls." The supply closet suddenly felt airless. Sarah pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor among the industrial cleaning supplies. She remembers. More than that. Mrs. Johnson says Gabriella talks to the pictures. Has full conversations with them like you're actually there. Rosa paused. "The woman is genuinely concerned, Sarah. She may be overwhelmed and underprepared, but she's not heartless. She sees what losing you is doing to Gabriella." "And the news station?" "That's where it gets interesting. The reporter who took the call is David Chen, investigative journalist with a reputation for taking on corrupt officials. He's already started asking questions about why a 2-year-old is in psychological distress after being separated from someone Henderson claimed was just a temporary caregiver." Sarah felt a flicker of hope, dangerous and fragile. "Will he help us?" "I don't know yet. But Carlos managed to get us some new information about Henderson that might interest Mr. Chin." Rosa's voice took on a sharp edge. "Remember those financial records we've been tracking? We found the smoking gun." Sarah stood up, energy flooding through her system. "What kind of smoking gun?" "The Children's Future Foundation doesn't just pay bonuses for quick placements. They pay higher bonuses for siblings who are separated versus those kept together. Henderson has received an additional $50,000 over the past 5 years specifically for splitting up family units." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. $50,000. Blood money paid for destroying the bonds between brothers and sisters, for traumatizing children who had already lost everything else. "How many families?" Sarah asked through gritted teeth. 47 documented cases. 47 sets of siblings torn apart so Henderson could pad her bank account. Rosa's voice was deadly quiet. "We have bank records, email communications, even a recorded phone call where Henderson brags about her efficiency rates to a foundation board member." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of Gabriella's 47 pictures, one for each family Henderson had destroyed. The symmetry was heartbreaking and somehow perfect, art created from pain, innocence responding to corruption with the only weapon it had. "What do we do with this information?" "We give it to David Chen. Along with Gabriella's story, Stella's condition, and every piece of evidence we've gathered about the inadequate placements." Rosa's tone shifted, becoming more urgent. "But Sarah, you need to understand what this means. If Chen runs this story, there's no going back. You'll be in the spotlight, your past will be scrutinized, and Henderson will come after you with everything she has." Sarah thought of Gabriella sitting in a stranger's house, drawing picture after picture of the angel she'd lost. She thought of Stella refusing to eat, slowly fading away from heartbreak and confusion. She thought of 47 other families who'd been destroyed by greed and bureaucratic cruelty. "I don't care what happens to me," she said firmly. "Those girls are worth any risk." "I was hoping you'd say that." Rosa's smile was audible through the phone. "Pack whatever you own, Sarah. You're moving into a safe house tonight. Once this story breaks, things are going to move very quickly." 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the living room of a modest ranch house on the outskirts of the city, her few possessions in a single duffel bag. The safe house was run by Maria Santos, no relation to the twins' mother, but the name's similarity felt like a sign. Maria was a former social worker who'd been fired for refusing to falsify reports, and her home had become a refuge for families fighting the system. Channel 7 wants to meet with you tomorrow, Rosa explained as Maria made coffee in the kitchen. David Chen has been digging into Henderson's background all day, and what he's found has him very interested in your story. What did he find? Rosa pulled out her tablet, scrolling through what looked like newspaper articles. Henderson has a pattern going back years. Families broken up, siblings separated, children removed from loving homes on questionable grounds. But she's also made enemies. What kind of enemies? Other social workers who tried to report her. Judges who questioned her recommendations. Foster families who refused to take children under suspicious circumstances. Rosa's eyes were bright with fierce satisfaction. Chen found a paper trail of complaints that were buried, investigations that were mysteriously dropped, witnesses who were suddenly transferred to different departments. Sarah felt hope rising in her chest, fragile but real. So he believes us? More than that. He thinks Henderson is part of a larger network of corruption that reaches all the way to the state level. Rosa leaned forward. But the story that really got his attention was Gabriella's drawings. What about them? Maria returned with coffee, settling into a chair across from them. I talked to Mrs. Johnson myself today, she said quietly. That poor woman is at the end of her rope. She has 6 children in her house, including 3 teenage boys who resent having a traumatized toddler disrupting their routine. Gabriella won't eat, won't play with the other children, won't respond to any attempts at comfort. But she draws, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Obsessively. Mrs. Johnson says Gabriella must have created over 100 pictures by now. All of them the same scene, a dark-haired woman holding 2 little girls. Sometimes the woman has wings. Maria's eyes were soft with sympathy. Mrs. Johnson recognizes the woman from the photo Henderson showed her. You. Sarah's throat closed completely. Gabriella was drawing her with wings. Drawing her as an actual angel. Chin wants to see the pictures, Rosa continued. Mrs. Johnson agreed to let him interview her on camera, with Gabriella's drawings as visual evidence of what separation trauma looks like. But he also wants to interview you. What would I tell him? The truth. How you found the twins, how they comforted you when you were at your lowest point, how they chose you as their family. Rosa's voice strengthened. How a corrupt social worker ripped them away from the only stability they'd known since their mother died. Maria set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. There's something else David Chin discovered that you need to know about. About the twins' mother. Sarah's pulse quickened. What about Maria? Her real name was Maria Elena Castillo. She was an undocumented immigrant from Guatemala, but she wasn't hiding from immigration services. Maria's voice was reverent. She was hiding from something much worse. What do you mean? Rosa pulled up a news article on her tablet, turning it so Sarah could see. The headline read, "Local hero dies saving hospital patients in fire." Sarah's hands shook as she read the article. 6 months ago, Maria Castillo had been working as a night janitor at Mercy General Hospital when an electrical fire broke out in the pediatric ward. Instead of evacuating, she'd run through smoke-filled corridors, carrying children to safety one by one. She'd saved 8 children before the ceiling collapsed, trapping her in the burning building. She died a hero, Maria said softly. But here's the part that makes it worse. She was scheduled to have surgery that day to remove a brain tumor. She knew she was dying, Sarah. She knew she only had weeks left, and she spent them working extra shifts to save money for Gabriella and Stella's future. Sarah stared at the grainy photo accompanying the article, a thin woman with the same dark hair and fierce eyes as her daughters, captured by a security camera as she carried a child to safety. This was the woman who had loved Gabriella and Stella first, who had marked them with protective scars and sung them moon songs. The money she saved, Sarah whispered. What happened to it? Rosa's expression darkened. That's where Henderson's corruption gets personal. Maria had over $8,000 in cash hidden in her apartment, money she'd saved by living on almost nothing. When the twins were found and taken into care, that money should have been held in trust for them. Should have been? Henderson reported finding less than $300. The rest mysteriously disappeared. Rosa's voice was ice-cold with fury. She didn't just steal Gabriella and Stella from you, Sarah. She stole their inheritance from their hero mother. The weight of Maria Castillo's sacrifice settled over Sarah like a mantle. This woman, this incredible, courageous woman, had given her life to save children. She'd worked herself to the bone to provide for Gabriella and Stella, had loved them enough to scar them with protection marks, had trusted them with stories of moons and packs and belonging. And Henderson had stolen from her corpse. David Chin needs to hear this story, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. All of it. Maria's heroism, Henderson's theft, Gabriella's drawings, Stella's silence. People need to know what's being done to these children. Are you sure? Maria asked gently. Once this story breaks, your life will never be private again. Every detail will be scrutinized, every choice questioned. Henderson will try to destroy your credibility any way she can. Sarah thought of Gabriella, sitting in a crowded house full of strangers, drawing angels with shaking hands. She thought of Stella, wasting away in silence because she couldn't understand why her angel had left her. She thought of Maria Castillo, running into a burning building to save other people's children while her own daughters waited for her to come home. Henderson can scrutinize me all she wants, Sarah said firmly. I'm not the one who steals from dead heroes and traumatizes babies for money. The next morning, Sarah sat across from David Chen in a television studio that smelled of coffee and ambition. Chen was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with the intense energy of someone who lived for the story that would change everything. Tell me about the first time you saw Gabriella and Stella, he said, his camera operator already rolling. Sarah looked directly into the lens and told the truth. About sitting outside a pawn shop with her mother's wedding ring, contemplating a future that held nothing but eviction and hunger. About two tiny girls in rags who tried to comfort a stranger's tears with a wilted dandelion and gentle hands. About falling in love with children who had nothing but somehow found enough to share. Chen's questions were sharp but fair, probing without being cruel. He asked about her background, her struggles, the lies she'd told to keep the twins safe. Sarah answered honestly, knowing that her imperfections would be used against her but refusing to hide behind anything less than complete transparency. Mrs. Henderson claims you're an unstable woman who became obsessed with children who weren't yours, Chen said. How do you respond to that? Sarah smiled, thinking of Gabriella's 47 pictures, of Stella's stubborn silence, of two little girls who'd chosen her as their pack. I'd say love doesn't always follow the rules, Mr. Chen. Sometimes the family that chooses you is more real than the one you're born into. After the interview, Chen walked her to the studio exit. This story is going to air tomorrow night, he said. Are you ready for what comes next? Sarah looked out at the city where Gabriella and Stella were waiting, where they were slowly fading away from heartbreak and confusion. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Henderson was counting her blood money, congratulating herself on another efficient placement. Somewhere out there, 47 other families were living with the scars of bureaucratic cruelty. I've been ready since the moment they took my daughters, Sarah said. Bring it on. That evening, Sarah sat in Maria Santos's living room, surrounded by members of the underground angels who'd become more family than her blood relatives had ever been. They were warriors preparing for battle, angels sharpening their wings for war. Tomorrow, the world would see Gabriella's drawings. They'd hear about Maria Castillo's heroism and Henderson's corruption. They'd learn what happened when a broken system met the unstoppable force of a mother's love. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to Maria Castillo, to the woman who'd loved Gabriella and Stella first and best. I won't let them be forgotten, she promised. I won't let them fade away. Whatever it takes, I'll bring them home. In houses across the city, a 2-year-old named Gabriella picked up a crayon and began her 48th drawing of an angel, while her sister Stella stared out a window and dreamed of silver moons and lullabies sung in a voice that tasted like home. The power of innocence was about to take on the machinery of corruption. And innocence was going to win. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 7. The courthouse steps were a sea of faces, signs, and camera crews that stretched for 3 city blocks. Sarah had seen crowds on the news before, political rallies, protests, celebrity trials, but she'd never imagined being at the center of one. The story of Gabriella and Stella's desperate drawings had exploded across social media like wildfire, turning 2 forgotten foster children into symbols of everything wrong with the system. Angel Sarah. Angel Sarah. The chant rose from the crowd as Rosa guided her through the throng of supporters. Hands reached out to touch her shoulders, voices called encouragement, and dozens of phone cameras captured every step. Sarah felt exposed and overwhelmed, but also strengthened by the visible proof that she and the twins weren't alone anymore. "Stay close," Emma whispered, flanking Sarah's other side. The lawyer Rosa had found was young but fierce, with the kind of burning intensity that came from growing up in foster care herself. "Henderson's people are trying to make this about mob rule versus legal procedure. Don't let them rattle you." Inside the courthouse, the contrast was jarring. Where the steps had been chaos and energy, the marble halls were cold and formal, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Sarah's heels clicked against the polished floor as they made their way to courtroom 4B, each step echoing like a countdown to judgment. The courtroom itself was packed beyond capacity. Every bench was filled with supporters, former foster children, Underground Angels members, families who'd been reunited through Rosa's network, and complete strangers who'd been moved by Gabriella's drawings. In the front row, Sarah spotted Marcus with his little sister Anna, now grown and working as a teacher. Their story of separation and reunion had been featured in David Chen's follow-up reports, part of the mounting evidence that keeping siblings together mattered more than bureaucratic convenience. On the other side of the aisle, Mrs. Henderson sat with her legal team, 3 attorneys in expensive suits who projected the kind of confident arrogance that came from never having lost a case. Henderson herself looked smaller than Sarah remembered, diminished somehow by the public scrutiny and media attention. But her eyes still held that cold calculation, the look of someone who viewed children as inventory to be processed rather than human beings to be protected. Judge Margaret Reyes entered the courtroom with the measured pace of someone who'd presided over thousands of family cases. She was an older woman with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, appointed to the family court after a distinguished career as a public defender. Rosa had done her research. Judge Reyes had a reputation for putting children's welfare above all other considerations, which was exactly what they needed. "This hearing will determine the custody and placement of Gabriella and Stella Castillo," Judge Reyes announced, using the twins' real last name for the first time in months. "The court has reviewed extensive documentation regarding their current foster placements, the circumstances of their removal from Ms. Vasquez's care, and the allegations of misconduct against Mrs. Henderson and the Children's Future Foundation." Sarah's heart hammered as she took her seat at the plaintiff's table. Somewhere in the building, Gabriella and Stella were waiting with court-appointed guardians, probably confused and frightened by all the official faces and formal procedures. They'd been through so much already. How much more trauma could 2 little girls endure? Mrs. Henderson's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Cromwell, stood to make his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case is about the rule of law versus mob emotion. Ms. Vasquez is an unemployed, homeless woman with no family support system who became obsessed with children who were never hers to begin with. She lied about her identity, falsified documents, and attempted to circumvent proper channels for adoption and foster care. Each word was a calculated blow, designed to reduce Sarah's love for Gabriella and Stella to pathology and delusion. Cromwell painted her as a dangerous fantasist who'd manipulated vulnerable children for her own emotional gratification, while portraying Mrs. Henderson as a dedicated professional trying to protect the twins from an unstable situation. "The state has a responsibility to place children with qualified families who can provide stability, resources, and proper care," Cromwell continued. "Ms. Vasquez, despite her apparent good intentions, cannot meet these basic requirements. To award her custody would be to prioritize sentiment over the children's actual welfare." When Emma stood to respond, Sarah felt the energy in the courtroom shift. The young lawyer's voice carried the authority of lived experience, the credibility of someone who'd survived the very system she was now challenging. Your Honor, this case is indeed about children's welfare, but not in the way Mr. Cromwell suggests. Gabriella and Stella Castillo are dying of heartbreak. They have stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped engaging with the world around them. Why? Because they were torn away from the only stable relationship they'd known since their heroic mother's death. Emma gestured to the packed courtroom behind her. The people filling these benches aren't a mob, Your Honor. They're survivors. Former foster children who understand what sibling separation does to a child's soul. Families who've been reunited after fighting the very corruption that put these babies in danger. They're here because they recognize something the state seems to have forgotten, that love creates family, not paperwork. The first witness Henderson's team called was Dr. Patricia Volkov, a child psychologist whose credentials filled 2 full pages. Dr. Volkov spoke in clinical terms about attachment disorders, the dangers of children bonding with inappropriate caregivers, and the importance of professional oversight in placement decisions. In my expert opinion, Dr. Volkov testified, these children have formed what we call a trauma bond with Ms. Vasquez. This is not healthy attachment, it's a survival response that often occurs when children are placed in unstable situations. Proper therapy in appropriate foster homes will help them develop more normal relationship patterns. Sarah felt sick listening to Gabriella and Stella's love being pathologized, reduced to psychological terminology that stripped away all humanity. She thought of Gabriella's fierce protectiveness toward her sister, of Stella's gentle attempts to comfort a stranger's tears. There was nothing disordered about the bonds they'd formed, they were real, powerful, and life-sustaining. Emma's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Dr. Volkov, how many hours have you spent observing Gabriella and Stella Castillo? I conducted a 90-minute evaluation last week. 90 minutes. And in that time, did the children speak to you? No, but that's consistent with selective mutism, which often occurs in. Did they eat the snacks you offered? No, but. Did they engage in any of the play activities you suggested? Dr. Volkov's composure began to crack. They were clearly traumatized, which supports my assessment that. Dr. Volkov, Emma interrupted smoothly, are you aware that Gabriella has created over 200 drawings of Ms. Vasquez since their separation? Are you familiar with the content of these drawings? I was told about some artistic expression, yes. Emma approached the witness stand with a folder full of photocopies. These are Gabriella's drawings, Dr. Volkov. In your expert opinion, what do they tell us about this child's emotional state? The drawings passed from hand to hand among the jury, simple crayon sketches that showed a dark-haired woman holding 2 small girls. Some showed all 3 figures smiling. Others showed them with tears. A few depicted the woman with wings, literally drawn as an angel watching over the children. Dr. Volkov studied the images, her clinical mask slipping slightly. They show persistent fixation on a single figure. Or they show a child desperately missing someone she loves, Emma countered. Dr. Volkov, in your professional experience, have you ever seen artwork that more clearly expresses a child's emotional attachment? The psychologist had no answer for that. Henderson's second witness was Robert Fleming, the director of the Children's Future Foundation. He spoke eloquently about the importance of proper vetting for foster families, the resources his organization provided to ensure stable placements, and the tragic consequences of placing children with unqualified caregivers. Ms. Vasquez may have good intentions, Fleming testified, but intentions alone don't qualify someone to raise children. Our foundation exists to ensure that vulnerable children receive the best possible care from families who have been thoroughly evaluated and approved. What Fleming didn't mention, and what Emma brought out in her cross-examination, was the financial incentive structure that had corrupted his foundation's mission. Document after document showed bonuses paid for quick placements, higher rewards for siblings placed separately, and a pattern of steering children toward families who made substantial donations. Mr. Fleming, Emma said, consulting her notes, is it true that your foundation paid Mrs. Henderson a $5,000 bonus for the expedited placement of Gabriella and Stella Castillo? Our organization provides performance incentives to encourage efficient Is it also true that the Johnson and Patel families, who received these children, have made combined donations of over $15,000 to your foundation in the past year? Fleming's face flushed red. The foundation accepts donations from many sources, including sources who receive children through Mrs. Henderson's recommendations. Any suggestion of impropriety is completely unfounded. Emma moved in for the kill. Mr. Fleming, how many siblings has Mrs. Henderson placed together versus separately in the past 5 years? The silence that followed was damning. Fleming clearly knew the statistics, but admitting to Henderson's abysmal record of keeping families together would destroy his credibility completely. I don't have those numbers memorized, he said finally. Then allow me to refresh your memory. Out of 112 sibling groups, Mrs. Henderson has kept exactly 8 families together. That's a 7% success rate, Mr. Fleming. 7%. Emma's voice rose with righteous anger. Would you call that efficient family preservation? When it was Emma's turn to present witnesses, the courtroom transformed from a sterile legal proceeding into something that felt more like a revival meeting. One by one, former foster children took the stand to tell their stories of separation and loss. Marcus testified about being split from his brothers at age 12, how the trauma of separation had affected his education, his relationships, his ability to trust. They told us it was temporary, he said, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. That we'd be reunited when they found a family big enough for all 3 of us. I waited 8 years for that family. It never came. Anna, his sister, spoke about the nightmares that had plagued her for years after being separated from her siblings. I used to dream that I was looking for them in a huge crowd, calling their names, but I could never find them. When Marcus finally found me and brought me home, those dreams stopped. Family isn't just nice to have, it's necessary for healing. Dr. James Rodriguez, a child psychologist whose research focused on sibling relationships, explained the science behind what everyone in the courtroom could see with their hearts. Siblings provide irreplaceable emotional support for children in trauma. They serve as witnesses to each other's experiences, validators of shared memory, and sources of continuity when everything else in their world changes. Separating bonded siblings doesn't protect them, it compounds their trauma exponentially. But it was Rosa's testimony that brought tears to even the court reporter's eyes. Rosa stood at the witness stand like a warrior queen, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd turned her own pain into purpose. Your Honor, 15 years ago, Mrs. Henderson told me the same lies she's telling now. That my boys would be better off apart, that they'd get more individual attention, that separation was in their best interests. Rosa's voice broke slightly. By the time I got them back, they were strangers to each other. My youngest son, Danny, didn't remember having brothers. We've spent years rebuilding what should never have been broken. Rosa looked directly at Mrs. Henderson as she continued. But I was one of the lucky ones. I had resources, education, the ability to fight back. Most parents don't. Most children disappear into the system and are never heard from again. Gabriella and Stella have something precious. They have someone who loves them enough to fight the entire state if necessary. Don't let bureaucracy destroy that. As Rosa stepped down from the witness stand, Sarah felt the weight of history in the courtroom. This wasn't just about Gabriella and Stella anymore, it was about every family torn apart by a system that valued efficiency over humanity, procedure over love. Judge Reyes called for a brief recess before the final phase of the hearing. As people filed out of the courtroom, Sarah remained in her seat, overwhelmed by the testimonies she'd heard. These people, these survivors, had traveled from across the state to tell their stories, to stand as living proof that families belong together. Emma sat beside her, gathering her notes. How are you holding up? I keep thinking about what Gabriella and Stella must be going through right now, Sarah said quietly. All these strangers talking about them, deciding their future, and they don't even understand why they can't come home. They're about to understand, Emma said softly. The judge is bringing them in for the final phase. She wants to observe their reactions to different people in the courtroom. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. They're coming here? Now? In about 10 minutes. Sarah, I need to prepare you, this might be difficult. They've been away from you for over a month. They might not react the way we hope. But Sarah barely heard the warning. Gabriella and Stella were coming. Her babies were going to be in the same room with her for the first time since that horrible morning when Henderson had torn them apart. Whatever happened next, she would see them again. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Judge Reyes explained that she would observe the children's reactions to various people in the courtroom as part of her determination about their best interests. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Gabriella and Stella entered flanked by 2 court officials, and Sarah's heart shattered at the sight of them. They were so much smaller than she remembered, thinner, their faces holding a hollow quality that spoke of too many tears and too little hope. Gabriella wore a yellow dress that was slightly too big for her, while Stella was in pink that clashed with her pale complexion. They looked like dolls dressed by strangers, all wrong angles and mismatched accessories. But their eyes, their beautiful dark eyes, were exactly as Sarah remembered. Wary now, and sad, but still holding that spark of fierce intelligence that had captivated her from the first moment. The court officials guided them to chairs near the judge's bench, clearly intending to keep them contained and controlled. Gabriella's gaze swept the packed courtroom with the methodical thoroughness of someone much older, taking in all the faces, searching for something specific. When her eyes found Mrs. Henderson, she went very still, her small hand reaching automatically for Stella's. Stella seemed more fragile, more withdrawn. She kept her gaze fixed on her lap, her tiny shoulders hunched inward as if she was trying to make herself invisible. Only when Gabriella squeezed her hand did she look up, following her sister's line of sight across the crowded room. And then Gabriella saw her. The recognition was instantaneous and electric. Gabriella's entire body went rigid, her eyes widening with shock and desperate hope. She rose from her chair so quickly that one of the court officials reached out to restrain her, but she was already moving. Angel. The word tore from Gabriella's throat like a prayer answered, carrying all the pain and longing of their month apart. Angel. Angel. She broke free from the startled official and ran down the courtroom aisle, her small legs pumping with determination. Behind her, Stella had seen what her sister had seen, and now she was running too, crying, Angel. Angel, with pure joy in her voice, the first words anyone had heard her speak in weeks. The courtroom erupted. People were crying, some standing to get a better view, others reaching out as if to help the children reach their destination faster. Mrs. Henderson was on her feet, shouting something about proper procedure, while her lawyers tried frantically to object to whatever was happening. But none of that mattered to Sarah. She was out of her chair and running toward Gabriella and Stella, her own tears streaming as she dropped to her knees just in time to catch them both in her arms. The impact of their small bodies nearly knocked her over, but she held on tight, gathering them against her chest as they sobbed, Angel, Angel, we missed you, we drew you, we waited, we knew you'd come back, in a stream of words and tears and desperate kisses. I'm here, Sarah whispered into their hair, breathing in their familiar scent and marveling at how perfectly they still fit against her. I'm here, my babies. I never stopped fighting for you. I never stopped loving you. Gabriella pulled back just enough to frame Sarah's face with her small hands, studying her features as if memorizing them. You real? Not drawing? I'm real, sweetheart. I'm real and I'm here and I'm never letting you go again. Stella, still clinging to Sarah's neck, whispered something that made Sarah's chest ache with fierce protectiveness, hungry, Angel. So hungry. But food tastes wrong without you. Around them, the courtroom had gone completely silent. Even Mrs. Henderson's lawyers had stopped their objections, struck speechless by the raw emotional power of the reunion unfolding before them. Judge Reyes watched from her bench with tears in her own eyes, seeing what no amount of expert testimony could convey, that these children belonged with this woman, that their bond was real and vital and irreplaceable. Angel, Gabriella said urgently, pressing close to Sarah's ear. The mean lady tried to take us away forever. But we knew. We knew you'd come for us because Pac doesn't leave Pac. Sarah looked into Gabriella's fierce dark eyes and saw something that made her heart stop. For just a moment, those eyes seemed to flash with golden light, and Sarah felt a strange tingling in the air around them. But then the moment passed, and Gabriella was just a little girl again, holding tight to the woman she loved. "That's right, baby," Sarah whispered back. "Pack stays together. Always and always." "Always and always," both twins echoed, and the phrase seemed to resonate through the courtroom like a vow, like a truth too powerful for bureaucracy to break. Judge Reyes let the reunion continue for several long minutes, allowing everyone present to witness the undeniable evidence of the children's attachment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I think the court has seen enough to make its determination. This hearing will recess for 1 hour while I prepare my ruling." As court officials gently but firmly separated Sarah from the twins, promising that it was temporary, that they'd be back soon, Gabriella looked over her shoulder with eyes that seemed far too knowing for a 2-year-old. "Not scared anymore, Angel," she called out. "Moon told us you'd come. Pack always finds pack." Sarah watched them disappear through the courtroom doors, her heart full of hope and terror in equal measure. The moon told them she'd come. Pack always finds pack. These weren't things normal toddlers said, but then again, Gabriella and Stella had never been normal children. They were something special. Something worth fighting the entire world to protect. And in 1 hour, she'd learn whether love was stronger than law, whether family chosen was more powerful than family assigned, whether the bond between a woman and the children who'd saved her soul could survive the machinery of a broken system. Whatever Judge Reyes decided, Sarah knew one thing with absolute certainty: Gabriella and Stella were hers, and she was theirs, and nothing would ever change that. Not bureaucracy, not corruption, not all the forces of law and order combined. They were pack. And pack stayed together. Always and always. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 8. Judge Reyes returned to the courtroom with the measured pace of someone carrying the weight of 2 small lives in her hands. The packed benches fell silent as she took her seat, her expression giving nothing away. Sarah gripped Emma's hand so tightly she was probably cutting off circulation, but the young lawyer didn't complain. In the front row, Rosa sat with her 3 sons, living proof that families could be rebuilt, that love could triumph over bureaucracy. Mrs. Henderson sat rigid at the defendant's table, her face a mask of professional composure that couldn't quite hide the panic in her eyes. The media attention had been brutal. David Chen's follow-up investigations had exposed not just her corruption but an entire network of officials who'd been profiting from children's misery. Her career was over regardless of what happened today, but that knowledge brought Sarah no satisfaction. All she cared about were 2 little girls who'd been through too much trauma already. "In my 30 years on the family court bench," Judge Reyes began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom, "I have never seen evidence of emotional attachment as compelling as what I witnessed an hour ago. The bond between Ms. Vasquez and these children is not manufactured or manipulated. It is real, profound, and clearly essential to their well-being." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, hope and terror warring in her chest. However, the judge continued, and Sarah felt her world tilt sideways. The court cannot ignore the practical considerations of placement. Children need stability, resources, and legal protections that good intentions alone cannot provide. Mrs. Henderson's attorney leaned forward, scenting victory. But Judge Reyes wasn't finished. "Which is why I am granting Ms. Vasquez emergency custody of Gabriella and Stella Castillo, effective immediately." The judge's voice rose over the eruption of cheers and applause. "Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the placement practices of Mrs. Henderson and the Children's Future Foundation. No child should be treated as a commodity to be bartered for financial gain." Sarah felt the world spin around her as Emma hugged her fiercely and Rosa shouted her joy from the gallery. Emergency custody. The twins were coming home. After a month of nightmares and legal battles and bureaucratic warfare, her babies were finally coming home. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone ashen, her professional mask finally cracking to reveal the panic beneath. As court officers moved to escort her from the building, she turned to stare at Sarah with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtroom. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea what those children really are. No idea what their mother was hiding from." Before Sarah could process what that meant, Mrs. Henderson was gone, swept away by officials and reporters, and the machinery of justice finally grinding in the right direction. The cryptic warning lingered in Sarah's mind like smoke, but it was quickly overwhelmed by more immediate concerns. Gabriella and Stella were brought back into the courtroom, and this time no one tried to contain them. They ran straight to Sarah, launching themselves into her arms with the kind of abandon that only children possessed. As Sarah held them close, breathing in their familiar scent and marveling at how right it felt to have them back where they belonged, she made a silent promise to Maria Castillo. She would love these girls with everything she had, protect them from whatever shadows their mother had feared, and give them the life their hero mother had dreamed of. "We go home now, Angel?" Gabriella asked, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "We go home now," Sarah confirmed, her own voice thick with tears. "All of us. Together. Always and always," Stella whispered, completing their sacred phrase. "Always and always," Sarah repeated, and knew with bone-deep certainty that she was making a vow that would shape the rest of their lives. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of their small apartment, making breakfast for her daughters while morning light streamed through windows that actually belonged to them. The adoption proceedings were nearly complete, just one more court date to make it official, to give Gabriella and Stella the Martinez name they'd been using since that first desperate lie at the homeless shelter. So much had changed since that dark morning when Mrs. Henderson had torn their family apart. David Shen had been true to his word about helping Sarah rebuild her life. He'd recommended her for a position at the newspaper's Community Outreach Division, where she worked with local organizations to highlight stories of families in crisis. The irony wasn't lost on her that her greatest tragedy had become her professional purpose, but it felt right somehow. She understood what it meant to be forgotten by the system, which made her uniquely qualified to help others find their voices. The apartment wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, furniture from thrift stores and church donations, but it was theirs. Gabriella and Stella had their own room, painted sunshine yellow with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. They'd made those stars together, Sarah holding each twin up so they could press the plastic shapes exactly where they wanted them. "For when we miss Mama," Gabriella had explained solemnly. "She lives with the stars now." "Morning, Angel," Stella said, padding into the kitchen in her favorite pajamas, the ones with cartoon angels on them that she'd insisted on buying with her first allowance. At nearly 3 years old, she was finally talking in full sentences, her vocabulary expanding daily as she made up for months of silence. "Good morning, baby girl." Sarah lifted Stella onto her hip, kissing her forehead and marveling at how solid and real she felt. No more hollow cheeks or worried eyes. Stella had bloomed in the security of home, becoming the chatty, affectionate child she'd always been meant to be. Gabriella appeared a moment later, already dressed and carrying the backpack she'd packed for their day out. She was the organized one, the planner, the fierce protector who still sometimes stood between Stella and the world as if expecting it to hurt them again. "Ready for our big day?" Sarah asked, setting Stella down so she could hug Gabriella too. "Adoption Day," Gabriella said with satisfaction, the word rolling off her tongue like a song. "Make it official day." "That's right. Today we become the Martinez family for real." Stella clapped her hands together, dancing a little circle around the kitchen. "Gabriella Martinez and Stella Martinez and Sarah Martinez." "Angel Martinez," Gabriella corrected solemnly. "She's Angel Martinez now." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. The nickname had stuck, becoming as natural as breathing. To the world, she was Sarah Vasquez, community advocate and single mother. But to Gabriella and Stella, she would always be Angel, the woman who'd appeared in their darkest hour and chosen to love them when no one else would. As they drove to the courthouse, Sarah found herself thinking about all the people who'd helped make this day possible. Rosa and the underground angels, who'd shown her that fighting the system was possible when you had family to stand with you. Emma, who'd taken their case pro bono and fought like a lioness for their right to be together. David Shen, whose reporting had not only exposed corruption but helped Sarah find her professional calling. Judge Reyes, who'd seen past legal technicalities to the heart of what family really meant. And Maria Castillo, whose love for her daughters had somehow transcended death to bring them all together. The courthouse steps were different this time. No crowds of reporters, no chanting supporters, just a few friends who'd become family. Rosa was there with her boys, Emma with her new caseload of files fighting other corrupt placements, David with his camera to document their victory. Marcus and Anna had driven down from Sacramento, bringing with them a photo album they'd made chronicling their own reunion story. "You ready for this?" Rosa asked as they climbed the marble steps together. "I've been ready since the moment I first saw them," Sarah replied, and meant it. The adoption proceeding was beautifully simple after the drama of their custody battle. Judge Martinez, a different judge this time, one who specialized in finalizing adoptions, spoke about the legal significance of what they were doing, but Sarah barely heard the words. All that mattered was Gabriella and Stella standing beside her, holding her hands as they officially became what they'd always been in their hearts, a family. When the judge asked if she had anything to say for the record, Sarah looked down at her daughters and felt her chest fill with a love so vast it could have powered the sun. "Your Honor, 6 months ago these girls saved my life. I was broken, alone, convinced that I had nothing left to offer the world. But Gabriella and Stella saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. They chose me before I chose them, loved me before I knew how to love them back. Today isn't just about me adopting them, it's about officially recognizing what they taught me. That family isn't about blood or law or paperwork. It's about choosing to love someone so completely that you'd face down the entire world to protect them." She squeezed their hands gently. "Gabriella and Stella Martinez, you are my daughters, my heart, my everything. I promise to love you, protect you, and help you grow into the amazing women I already see you becoming. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for teaching me what it means to be someone's angel." The judge smiled, signing the final papers with a flourish. "Congratulations, Martinez family. May you have many happy years together." As they posed for pictures on the courthouse steps, Gabriella tugged on Sarah's skirt to get her attention. "Angel, we want to tell you something," she said seriously. "Something we never told before." Sarah knelt down to their level, her heart skipping. "What is it, sweetheart?" Gabriella and Stella exchanged one of their wordless looks, the kind of twin communication that still amazed Sarah. Then Gabriella reached out to cup Sarah's face in her small hands, her dark eyes grave and knowing. "We picked you," she said simply. "That day outside the store with the rings. We saw you crying and we knew." "Knew what?" "That you needed angels," Stella chimed in, her voice soft with wonder. "Mama always said we were her little angels. She taught us to look for people who needed help, who had sad in their hearts." Sarah's breath caught. "You approached me because you thought I needed help?" "You looked so lonely," Gabriella explained, her eyes shimmering with tears. "So broken. Like the moon when it's only a tiny piece instead of whole." "Mama said angels help broken people become whole again," Stella added. "She said that's why God made angels, to find the people who forgot how to hope." Sarah stared at these two incredible children who had somehow reversed her entire understanding of their first meeting. She'd thought she was rescuing them, but they'd been rescuing her. They'd seen her despair and approached with the pure intention of offering comfort, giving her their wilted dandelion and gentle touches because that's what angels did for broken souls. "So you see," Gabriella concluded with the solemn wisdom of someone far older than her years, "we picked you first. We loved you first. And that's why it worked, because love has to start somewhere, and we started it." Sarah pulled them both into her arms, crying openly now as the full magnitude of what they'd given her hit home. These children hadn't just saved her from homelessness and despair, they'd saved her from a life without purpose, without love, without the fierce joy that came from having someone to protect and cherish. "My little angels," she whispered into their hair. "My brave, beautiful little angels." As the celebration moved to a nearby restaurant, David pulled Sarah aside with an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket. something I found while researching the story about Maria Castillo. He handed her a sealed envelope, yellowed with age and bearing Sarah's name in Maria's careful handwriting. "For whoever loves my daughters," David read from his notes. The hospital administrator found it in Maria's personal effects, along with instructions that it should be given to anyone who adopted Gabriella and Stella. But here's the incredible part, Sarah, Maria wrote this letter 3 months before she died. 3 months before you ever met the twins. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the envelope, her heart pounding with anticipation and something that felt like destiny. The letter inside was written in Spanish, with English translation in Maria's neat handwriting below each line. Asterisk, to the angel who will find my daughters. I am writing this letter knowing I will not live to see my babies grow up. The doctors have told me the truth about my illness, and I accept what is coming. But I cannot accept leaving Gabriella and Stella alone in a world that does not understand what they are. My daughters are special, different from other children. They see things others cannot see, feel things others cannot feel. They will know when they meet the person meant to love them. They will recognize their guardian angel by the sadness in her heart and the capacity for fierce love in her soul. I have been watching a woman who feeds the homeless near the hospital where I work. She gives away her own food, her own money, even when she clearly has nothing to spare. Her name is Sarah, and though she does not know it yet, she has the heart of a true angel. I pray that if something happens to me, God will guide my daughters to her. She looks broken now, lost and alone. But Gabriella and Stella will see what I see, that beneath the pain is a woman capable of love so deep it could heal the world. My daughters will save her just as surely as she will save them, because that is how angels work. They find each other in the darkness and become light. If you are reading this, then my prayers have been answered. You have found my little angels, or perhaps they have found you. Either way, you were meant to be their mother just as surely as I was. Love them as I would have loved them. Protect them as I would have protected them. And know that somewhere in the stars, their first mother is watching over all of you with joy in her heart. With all my love and gratitude, Maria Elena Castillo *. Sarah read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Maria had known. Somehow, impossibly, she'd known that Sarah would be the one to love her daughters. She'd watched Sarah giving food to homeless people, probably those same weeks when Sarah was losing her job, falling behind on rent, slowly sinking into the despair that would eventually lead her to that pawn shop bench. And she'd prayed for them to find each other. How is this possible? Sarah whispered, looking up at David through tears that wouldn't stop coming. I don't know, he admitted. But I've learned not to question the impossible when it comes to your family. You 3 were meant to find each other, anyone can see that. Sarah folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest like a sacred relic. Maria Castillo had given her daughters the greatest gift imaginable, not just life, but the knowledge that they were angels meant to heal broken souls. And she'd given Sarah something just as precious, confirmation that love could transcend death, that some bonds were written in the stars long before hearts found each other. That evening, as Sarah tucked Gabriella and Stella into their shared bed, they still insisted on sleeping together, finding comfort in each other's presence. She told them about their mother's letter. Mama knew? Gabriella asked, her eyes wide with wonder. She knew we would find you? She prayed for it, Sarah confirmed. She watched me taking care of other people and hoped that someday I'd take care of you too. Mama was magic, Stella said matter-of-factly. She could see the future sometimes. She saw you before you saw us. Sarah thought about that as she kissed them goodnight, turning off the lights so their glow-in-the-dark stars could shine. Maria Castillo had been a single mother working multiple jobs to support her children, but she'd still found time to help others, to save lives in a hospital fire, to love her daughters so completely that even death couldn't break her commitment to their welfare. She'd been a hero in every sense of the word, and her greatest heroic act had been recognizing that Sarah had the capacity for that same kind of love. As Sarah settled into her own bed, she could hear the twins whispering to each other in their room, the soft, musical conversation of sisters who'd never really been apart, not even when bureaucracy had tried to tear them away from each other. Tomorrow we show Angel the special place, Gabriella was saying. The place where Mama hid the magic things, Stella agreed. Sarah smiled, not bothering to try to decipher what they meant. Gabriella and Stella were full of mysterious references to magic and moons and things their mother had taught them before her death. Some of it was probably just the imagination of children processing grief. Some of it might be something more. It didn't matter. Whatever secrets Maria Castillo had left for her daughters, whatever special legacy she'd passed down through blood and love and midnight lullabies, Sarah would help them discover it when they were ready. Because that's what mothers did. They protected their children's mysteries until they were old enough to understand them. They loved without conditions, fought without reservation, and held space for magic in a world that often forgot to believe in it. 3 angels who'd found each other in the darkness. 3 broken souls who'd chosen to heal together. A family built not on blood or law or tradition, but on the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to love when the world had forgotten how. Sarah Elena Martinez. Gabriela Castillo Martinez. Stella Castillo Martinez. A mother and her daughters, bound together by love stronger than death, deeper than law, more enduring than any force on earth. Their greatest love story wasn't a romance, it was this. 2 little girls who'd seen a broken woman and decided she was worth saving. A woman who'd looked at 2 forgotten children and decided they were worth fighting the entire world to protect. Angels choosing their family. Family choosing to be angels. Love triumphing over everything else, exactly as it was always meant to. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and like this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to know the country in which you are in, listening to this story. Which country is that? Please comment below.